Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a grand, sweeping historical journey. We're going to trace the architectural blueprint of Western political thought, starting all the way back in the dusty, sun-drenched agoras of ancient Greece, and following that unbroken line right up to the drafting of our modern constitutions. You know, if you've ever wondered where our ideas about justice, civic responsibility, and the rule of law actually come from, you are absolutely in the right place. This isn't just ancient history, it's the literal heritage of how we govern ourselves today.
Here's our roadmap for this evolution of political thought. We'll start in the Greek civic laboratory, move on to Plato and Aristotle, dive into Rome's rule of law, track natural law's epic survival, and finally, unpack the modern constitutional blueprint.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the Greek civic laboratory.
Let's think about the word polis for a second. The ancient Greek city-state wasn't just a place where people happened to live, it was the fundamental political unit. Because Greece has this incredibly mountainous, fractured geography, it naturally encouraged the formation of these fiercely independent, distinct city-states, rather than one massive unified empire. And because they were so independent, they basically became tiny, intense laboratories. The polis was the ultimate testing ground where rigorous philosophy and everyday political life collided for the very first time.
And it's fascinating to see what happens in different laboratories. On one hand, you have Sparta, which maintained a super strict oligarchic system, controlled entirely by a small elite warrior class. But Athens? Athens took a radical turn toward democracy. This all kicked off with the early 6th century BCE reforms of Solon, who abolished debt slavery in a massive move known as the shaking off of burdens, and it continued with Cleisthenes. He boldly reorganized society into 10 new tribes based on where people lived rather than who their parents were. These structural changes were an absolute game changer. They created the actual conditions where regular citizens could stand up in the public square and openly debate policy.
But of course, questioning society comes with really intense human stakes. Back in 399 BCE, the great philosopher Socrates was put on trial and executed by his fellow Athenians. The charge? Corrupting the youth. Socrates firmly believed in examining our moral assumptions through persistent dialogue and pure reason. His method was relentless. He forced citizens to actually stop and think about what justice and virtue really meant, and honestly, it terrified the establishment. His death proved that inquiring into the nature of good government wasn't just some fun academic exercise. It was literally a matter of life and death.
Which brings us to Section 2, Plato, Aristotle, and governance.
The really crucial point here is how Socrates' execution impacted his most famous student, Plato. In his absolute masterpiece, The Republic, Plato argued that popular opinion was highly dangerous. I mean, having just watched democratic Athens execute his beloved mentor, he completely distrusted the crowd. He believed that just governance required what he called philosopher kings. These would be rulers rigorously trained in reason and civic virtue, a class of specially educated guardians. For Plato, the ideal state had to be organized by absolute wisdom and objective truth, totally insulated from the turbulent, emotional whims of the masses.
But then we get to Plato's own student, Aristotle, who took a much more grounded, practical approach to the whole thing. In his work, The Politics, he analyzed real existing constitutions and classified them into 6 types, based on the number of rulers, so one, few, or many. Crucially, though, he paired every single legitimate form of government with its corrupted counterpart. Aristotle warned us that unchecked power always, without fail, leads to tyranny. He famously praised the mixed constitution and argued that the rule of law was infinitely superior to the rule of any single individual. He believed politics existed to serve human flourishing, right there in the reality of the public square.
Now let's head over to Italy for Section 3, Rome's rule of law.
As the Greek era began to wane, the torch of political philosophy was passed directly to Rome, which gave us an incredibly vital new concept, the res publica. This literally translates to the public thing. The great statesman and philosopher Cicero described this as the ideal Roman state, a place where sovereignty fundamentally belongs to the people, not to a king. Now, to actually make this work in practice, governance required constant consultation and shared authority. They achieved this through the Roman Senate, which acted as a powerful check on executive power, and a system of 2 consuls who were elected annually. Why 2? To ensure power was never concentrated in one person's hands for too long, a brilliant balancing act.
Underpinning this massive Roman legal machine was a profound philosophical shift, the concept of natural law. This idea actually drew really deeply from Greek Stoicism, which was founded by Zeno around 300 BCE. The Stoics taught that all human beings share in a universal reason. Cicero took this and argued brilliantly that true law is just right reason in harmony with nature. Guys, this is a massive leap. It established the philosophical foundation that human-made laws aren't just whatever the ruler happens to say that day. They actually have to conform to higher, universal moral principles that apply to everyone, regardless of rank or nationality.
Rome's commitment to orderly governance didn't happen overnight. It evolved over centuries. Around 450 BCE, they created the 12 Tables, which was Rome's very first written legal code. They posted it publicly right in the Forum so everyone could see the exact rules governing contracts, property, and public conduct. Then, to put this into perspective, nearly 1,000 years later, between 529 and 534 CE, Emperor Justinian commissioned the Corpus Juris Civilis. This was a breathtaking, systematic compilation of Roman law that officially distinguished between civil law, the law of nations, and natural law. It treated law as a highly rational system for millions of people across 3 entire continents, and it became the master text for European scholars for the next millennium.
Which brings us to Section 4, Natural Laws, Epic Survival.
So in 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire falls. It collapses. But the incredible thing is, the ideas didn't die with it. The Catholic Church essentially stepped into that massive administrative vacuum. They preserved and adopted those core Roman legal concepts through canon law. Later on, brilliant medieval thinkers like Thomas Aquinas came along and revived Cicero's arguments, heavily reinforcing the idea of natural law. They used it to assert something revolutionary for the time, that even secular absolute monarchs were bound by moral principles higher than their own royal decrees. Through the Church, Roman concepts of formal legal procedure, clearly defined rights, and equality before the law became deeply, permanently embedded into the very DNA of European legal culture.
And finally, we arrive at Section 5, the modern constitutional blueprint.
Let's look at this timeline. In 1215, English barons forced King John to sign the Magna Carta at Runnymede, which directly revives that old Roman principle that rulers must be bound by established law. Fast forward to 1748, right in the thick of the Enlightenment, and the philosopher Montesquieu publishes The Spirit of the Laws. He extensively cited those ancient Greek and Roman models to argue against absolute monarchy. By the late 1700s, this unbroken, direct line of thinking profoundly influenced the framers of the United States Constitution, who viewed ancient Rome as the absolute ultimate model of a functioning republic.
Thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau challenged religious authority by reviving those old Greek debates about consent and community, what Rousseau so famously called the social contract. When Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay sat down to write the Federalist Papers, they were essentially acting as modern architects, but they were utilizing Aristotle's ancient logic of constitutional design. They deliberately borrowed Rome's model of a republic, specifically utilizing separated powers and a divided legislature to prevent tyranny. They quite literally built modern democracy using Greek and Roman blueprints.
So, what does all of this mean for us? It leaves us with a final, absolutely vital question. Knowing now that the structural foundations of our society, our very concepts of justice, universal reason, and the careful division of power, were laid down in the ancient agoras and the Roman Forum over 2 millennia ago, does your modern government live up to those ancient standards of reason, civic duty, and natural law envisioned by its original architects? It's definitely a challenging thought to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. And remember, keep questioning the world around you, just like Socrates.